Just about every weekday, you're going to find me doing something I don't want to do. I don't love to exercise. Is anybody with me? I know Jorge's with me down here. I don't love it, but just about every morning you can find me doing that. I'd much rather sleep in. I'd much rather skip it. But I know that it's good for me, so I do it. I have a healthy fear of what would happen to me if I did not do it. I also trust my doctor who says, hey man, you should exercise. So I'd much rather do the easy thing. We call that the path of least resistance. But fear and trust move me to act. That's true about your health, but that's also true about your spiritual life. Sometimes obedience to God is costly, but when we fear Him and when we trust Him, that gives us the courage to obey. All good. All good. We can just acknowledge that. That's all right. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 1 and Exodus chapter 2 today. You could turn in your Bible there. It'll also be on the screen. In the face of a terrifying king, 3 Hebrew women feared God, trusted His promises, and then walked in courageous obedience. God used them to bring about redemption of an entire people. So this morning we're continuing our series, Rivers. We began at the life-giving river in the Garden of Eden, and today we're going to go down to the Nile River. It's supposed to be a place of life, but becomes the place where death reigns. So Exodus 1 is where we're going to be. That's where we're going to begin. And in the passage before us, we're going to see that those who fear God and trust in His promises will walk in courageous obedience. And we're going to pick up here in this story in a second, but I like to kind of catch you up to speed. I don't really like to start in the middle of a story without getting you there. And so here's kind of how we got to where we're going to pick up today. The book of Exodus actually grows from the soil of the book of Genesis. So like Genesis 1, God created man, and when He created man, He said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Well, in Exodus chapter 1, the people of God, they have been fruitful. They have done just that. They have multiplied down in Egypt. And then at the end of the book of Genesis, the people of God came down to Egypt from Canaan. They were honored by Pharaoh and the Egyptians. But when you get to Exodus chapter 1, it's been a few centuries. And the people of God are no longer honored. There's a new Pharaoh. He's no friend of Israel. And then in the book of Genesis chapter 3, there's a promise. The seed of the serpent will be at enmity with the seed of the woman. That is, those who oppose God and His rule and His reign will be at war with those who align with God's rule and God's reign. That's a promise from Genesis 3. And that war, you could read the book of Genesis that way. That this war is playing out, and it even spills into the book of Exodus, and that's what we find. That the seed of the serpent is still at war with the seed of the woman. The seed of the serpent, we find, is Pharaoh. Archaeological record tells us that Pharaoh wore a cobra on his head as a crown. Pharaoh is the seed of the serpent, and he is at war with the seed of the woman, that is the people of God. And the people of God have become numerous in Egypt, and the snake-wearing king hates and fears them, so he orders that every Hebrew baby boy be slaughtered at birth. So this morning, we're going to consider 2 stories, and we're going to understand the courage of 3 Hebrew women, 2 midwives and a mother. And this subject is fitting for Mother's Day, but not because it only applies to women. Every mother, every father, every daughter and son, everyone in the room These women, their fear-fueled and faith-filled obedience is an example for all of us to follow. And we're going to begin by observing the courage of two midwives who feared God more than man. So we're going to look at Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 through 21. If you wanted to give these verses a heading, you could write, "The Midwives' Courage." That's what you could write down. And this story actually has 3 scenes in it, 3 movements. It's opposition, courage, and then blessing. And we'll see that as we work through the text together. Let's begin with the opposition in verse 15 of chapter 1. It says, "Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, the other Puah, 'When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live.'" Pharaoh speaks to these women and gives them a horrific command. Every time that a Hebrew boy is born, you will kill him. These women, these midwives, were in an ideal position to obey this command. You know, at this time in history, there's no way to know if your child is a male or a female until birth. And the midwife has the unique opportunity to accomplish what Pharaoh has commanded them, maybe without the mother even knowing it. And so by the killing of the Hebrew baby boys, what Pharaoh is doing is, number one, he's killing off any future Hebrew warriors that he so feared. And he's also engaging in some kind of population control. We've got to get these people have been fruitful, they have multiplied, we've got to get that number down. That's what he's up to. But really what he's up to, really what's happening is the seed of the serpent is attacking the seed of the woman. This is the opposition. And how do the people of God respond when there's this kind of opposition? How should they respond? We're going to see in verses 17 through 19. Here's how they respond: with fear-fueled courage. Look in verse 17. "But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live." The text tells us that these women, they feared God. To fear God is to know that He alone defines right and wrong, and that His judgment matters more than Pharaoh's threats. So they feared God. Now consider the risk. In the ancient world, to defy the king is treason. To commit treason means your death. The punishment is death. But these women knew there's something worse than death. There's something worse than death, and it's the judgment of God. And these women knew that. And so they feared God. They aligned themselves with God's purposes and God's rule and God's reign, and that led them to obey Him, no matter how costly it might be. So they did not do as the king commanded. This is fear-fueled courage. Not the fear of man, but the fear of God. Well, years go by. Comes to Pharaoh's attention. There seems to be no decrease in the amount of Hebrew baby boys. And he wants to know why. So verse 18. "So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, 'Why have you done this? And let the male children live.' The midwives said to Pharaoh, 'Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them.'" Pharaoh's asking, "Why have I not been obeyed?" The midwives give an answer, but their real answer is, "Because we're resisting your command. We're subverting. We're not doing what you're telling us to do." These Hebrew midwives responded to opposition with fear-fueled courage. And then what happens? God blesses them. There's opposition and courage, and then God blesses them. Look in verse 20. It says, "So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, He gave them families. God rewards the midwives for their courageous obedience. He gave them families. Ancient tradition suggests that midwives did not have families. They didn't have children. They didn't have time. They were so busy with other mothers and other children and births and these kinds of things that they didn't have time for their own family, so they didn't have children. But here, God blesses these women with families. Instead of taking lives, they are rewarded with new life. And God blessed these women, but He not only blessed them, God uses their obedience to bless others. Despite the death warrant given by Pharaoh, the people of God, it says they were fruitful and they multiplied even still, that Pharaoh himself cannot stop God's plans. See, God honors the obedience of these women. They feared God more than man, and they courageously obeyed. They aligned themselves with God's purposes. They didn't follow the path of least resistance. They risked everything, and God honored them. Opposition, courage, blessing. Well, it looks like Pharaoh has been defeated, but the war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent rages on. Pharaoh will not give up trying to destroy the people of God. And so that brings us to our second story this morning. It's a story of courageous obedience and three more scenes: opposition, courage, and blessing. And here we are introduced to a mother who demonstrates courageous obedience. We had a heading for our last story. It was the midwife's courage. And for this story, Exodus 1:22 through chapter 2, verse 10, you could call it a mother's courage. Well, the story begins with more opposition. Look in chapter 1, verse 22. It says, "Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, 'Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live.'" Pharaoh no longer leaves it up to the Hebrews to kill their own people. He commands all his people, all the Egyptians, to throw every Hebrew baby boy into the Nile River. Rivers are supposed to be a symbol of life, but Pharaoh is making the Nile River a place of death. This is the opposition. Now, how do the people of God respond to opposition? We saw last time it was with fear-fueled courage. Here it's faith-filled courage. Look in verse 1 of chapter 2. It says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. And the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months." Now this is a birth announcement. This is supposed to be a happy thing, but remember the context. This is in the context of the Egyptians throwing male Hebrew babies into the Nile. It's in that context that we're introduced into a Levite man and a Levite woman. That's the tribe of Levi. It's telling us that they're Israelites, they're Hebrews. And we have this birth announcement of a Hebrew son. That should be time for celebration, but in context, that's actually a time for alarm, because Pharaoh has issued a death decree. And this is a birth announcement. Now, throughout the Bible, as you read on your own, you'll notice that every time we get like a story about somebody's birth, we know that person's about to be significant. God's about to do something with or through that person. And at the end of this passage, we learn that the person that's being born here is Moses. Moses, he's the one who delivers the people of Israel out of the clutches of Pharaoh. He's the main character for the book of Exodus. He's the main character for Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. And actually, Moses and the law of Moses is important for your understanding of the rest of the Bible, even into the New Testament. It's this Moses that's born, but Exodus chapter 2, not really about Moses. Our attention is on Moses' mother. That's where our attention is. See, she hides Moses. What a courageous thing to do. to know what the king has said and to willfully disobey, risking everything. She hides Moses. Now, why did she hide Moses? The text tells us, it says that she saw that he was a fine child. That language matches Genesis chapter 1. When God starts to create things, when he sees that it's good, when he sees everything that he's made, he says, behold, it's good. That is, this is something that I've made. It's something that I want to keep. This is something that I want to hang on to. Well, Moses' mom seems to have the same inclination that this child is a fine child. She desires to keep him, not to discard him into the Nile. But that's not the only reason why Moses' mother kept Moses and hid him. It wasn't just maternal instinct. The author of Hebrews tells us, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 says this, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith. Moses' parents hid him by faith. They trusted God's protection. They did not fear Pharaoh's power. They're kind of like the Hebrew midwives. They feared God rather than man, but their fear is actually joined together with what the author of Hebrews says, faith. She hid Moses by faith. What does that mean? It means that she believed something to be true about God. I think that Moses' mother knew about God's character. She knew about God's faithfulness in the past. She knew the old stories of Abraham and Jacob. She knew those stories and how God had preserved his people and God had delivered those who aligned with him. She knew that God was faithful in the past. So then she knew that he would be faithful in her present. And that gave her the courage to act in these ways. So look what she does in verse 3. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. And she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. By faith, this mother made a basket, waterproofed it, put it in the river with the baby inside, hid the basket among the reeds. By faith, she courageously defied the king and obeyed God. By faith. This is showing us that Moses' mother trusted God's faithfulness, and her faith in God resulted in an action. Her faith resulted in an action, and this is just like another guy I know. This is just like Noah. You've heard of Noah. Genesis chapter 6, God told Noah, build an ark. God was going to judge the whole world because of sin by sending this flood. And he told Noah, build an ark, build a box. That's what ark means. Build a box and get inside of it. And Noah believed God. Noah's belief resulted in action. He actually built the thing according to God's specifications. He actually got inside the box. So because of Noah's faith, which resulted in obedience, God delivered him from the flood. That's Noah. Well, Moses' mother is showing the same kind of faith and obedience as Noah. She trusted that God would deliver her son. So she made a basket, put him inside, and put him in the water. Now, the author of Exodus is actually going to connect these dots for us. By the way, the author of Exodus is Moses. He's writing about his own birth story. He also wrote Genesis, so he is going to connect these things for us. And here's how he does it. The word for basket there in Exodus chapter 2, verse 3, is actually the same Hebrew word for the word ark in Genesis chapter 6. And it's those two places are the only places where that Hebrew word appears in the Hebrew Bible. So he's connecting those two things. And also Noah and Moses' mother used the same waterproofing technique to build these arks. Moses' mother built an ark. a smaller one, and put the baby inside. Moses' mom is following the example of Noah. See, God was faithful with Noah. God was faithful in the past. So she's saying, like, I know he'll be faithful now. I can trust him. I don't have to obey the king. I don't have to fear the king because I know that I can trust God now. So she puts Moses in an ark, sets him in the water. Imagine what this must have felt like for her. She put her son in the water, not knowing for certain what would become of him. You may have felt something similar when you handed your kid the car keys when they turned 16 and watched them drive away first time, not knowing what will become of them. Or you launch them into college to who knows where, not knowing what will become of them. This is the same question that Moses' mom probably has. It's the question that you and I have. That's the question that you and I have. What will become of Moses? And Moses' mom sends a spy. Look at verse 4. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Moses' sister is the spy. She stands by close to watch. She's the eyes and ears of the reader, so we know what happens to Moses. Later in the story, we figure out this person, this sister is Miriam. She watches to see what. It's interesting how many women play a role in Moses' salvation from Pharaoh. How many women? We have the midwives, we have a mom, we have a daughter. We're going to have some more females in this story to deliver and to save Moses so Moses can be the deliverer of the entire nation at the end of the story. It's interesting how many women are important in this story. Well, Moses' parents' response to opposition, the people of God respond to opposition with courageous obedience. Faith-filled obedience. Well, the final scene in this story, opposition, courage, the final scene is blessing. Moses' mom, she took great care to make sure her son wasn't discovered. She put him, it's not a basket where he's like on top, it's a box. Inside the box, and she puts him among the reeds. So maybe you can't hear him as well, maybe it's not as visible. She hopes no one finds him, but despite her best efforts, someone does find her. And it's not just anybody that finds this box. It's Pharaoh's own daughter. Look at verse 5. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" You see what's happening? You see how God is providentially blessing this situation. Moses' sister had been standing at a distance. The princess discovers the baby. Moses is crying. She pities him. She draws the baby out of the water from among the reeds. And Moses' sister takes it upon herself. How about we go get a Hebrew woman to nurse this baby for you? And look at God at work. Verse 8. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. Look at God's providential blessing of this obedience. Moses' mom still gets to be mom. She still gets to raise him. And now the princess is going to pay her to do it. In verse 10, there's more blessing. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." Moses moved into the palace. This was a person who was marked for death, and now he's a prince in Egypt. This sounds like the story of Joseph. You know, Joseph in the book of Genesis, he's placed into a cistern, and his brothers are thinking about killing him. Well, the way that story ends is he's number 2, a prince in Egypt, and Moses is living out Joseph's story. And this is the blessing of God in Moses' life. This blessing in Moses' life was a result of his mother's obedience. Her courageous obedience that was rooted in her faith in God, her trust in God. As we look at these two stories kind of side by side, here's something that we notice. Like when faced with opposition, the people of God walk in fear-fueled and faith-filled, courageous obedience. And that's something that God blesses. That's something that God honors. And that's something that has a ripple effect that you may not be able to imagine or see. The midwives, they were courageously obedient because they feared God more than man, and they preserved the people of God in Egypt. But why does that matter? Why is that important? Well, it's because a Levite man and a Levite woman had a son under these circumstances. And these parents, they trusted God, and with this courageous obedience, they protected this son from the king's evil edict. And that's a great story. But why does that matter? Well, it matters because that son, that baby boy, was not just any baby boy. That was Moses. That was Moses, the one God sent to deliver Israel from Egypt. What's interesting here is in Exodus chapter 2, Moses is living out what God's going to do with the people of Israel later. So the princess heard Moses crying, pitied him, and drew him from the water among the reeds. Well, at the end of Exodus 2, it says that God hears the cries of the people of Israel and he pities them. The same word, he pities them. And then what does he do? Well, he delivers them from Egypt, and one of the ways that he does that is he parts the Red Sea. Well, that word Red Sea in the English, actually the Hebrew word is the English word reed. It's actually the Sea of Reeds, the Reed Sea. So just as the princess heard Moses crying, pitied him, and delivered him from among the reeds, so too does God hear the cries of his people, pity them, and deliver them through the Sea of Reeds. Moses is living out what's going to happen to the people of Israel. He is the deliverer. That's why it matters. He's the deliverer. But why does it matter that Moses is the deliverer and delivers Israel? Why does that matter? Well, because the story continues, and there's another deliverer, there's another baby boy, there's another set of parents who are faced with a similar opposition. Because there's another king. This king also fears the people of God. He actually fears the announcement that another king has been born in Bethlehem. And he orders the death of male children under the age of 2 that were residing in Bethlehem at the time. But the boy's parents were warned by an angel. The parents believed God, they trusted him, and they obeyed. They fled Bethlehem to Egypt, of all places. Well, why does that matter? Because that just wasn't any baby. And that family would return to Israel. This person, this child, he was actually God's own son who lived a perfect life. Perfectly, sinlessly obeying God. Even in the face of great opposition, he obeyed God to the point of death. Even death on a cross. But on the third day, Jesus rose from the dead, claiming victory over the serpent, and by his death and his resurrection, he proved to be the new and greater Moses. He doesn't just deliver us from Egypt, he delivers us from our greater enemy, sin and death and Satan. you see what God has done. The fear-fueled and faith-filled courage of two midwives and a mother kicked over dominoes that eventually lead to the salvation of the whole world. They could have never known that their acts of courageous obedience would have led to that. I want to offer three challenges to you this morning. Three challenges for you this morning. You know, you may never stand before a king, but you will stand somewhere. And what are you going to do then? Here's challenge number one. Fear God. Fear God. The midwives feared God more than Pharaoh. Who do you fear more? You fear the judgment of the world, or you fear the judgment of God? You fear the wrath of the serpent, or the wrath of the one who promises to crush the head of the serpent? The apostles understood this. In Acts chapter 5, they were arrested for preaching the gospel. They told them, "Stop it." And their response was, "We must obey God rather than men. So must we." Who do you fear? Who do you fear? What do your actions say about who you fear? That's challenge number one. Here's challenge number two. Trust God. Trust God. Like Moses' mother, trust God. Know that God's got it. God is not just a promise-making God. He's a promise-keeping God. God was faithful in the past. You can know He's going to be faithful right now. Trust God. Believe Him. He's faithful. Where do you need to trust Him today? And what does your faith look like in action? What steps are you taking as a result of your trust in God? Fear God, trust God, and here's the third one. Walk in courageous obedience. Whether you're a mother, daughter, father, or son, God honors fear-fueled, faith-filled, courageous obedience. That's something He blesses. That's something He honors. And you won't be able to know all of the ripple effects of your just like simple act of courage and obedience. You'll never know what God's going to do through it. So where do you need to obey God today? Are you willing to obey God even if it hurts? You may never stand before Pharaoh, but you will stand somewhere. You may never stand before Pharaoh, but you will stand outside your kid's bedroom door trying to decide what kind of parent you're going to be. You know, the most valuable thing that you can give your kids is not an opportunity for a great GPA or an opportunity for an athletic scholarship. You know, the most valuable thing that you can give your kids is an example of someone who fears God and trusts in God. You may never stand before Pharaoh, but you will stand at work, wondering if your integrity is worth the cost. But I can promise you this, no promotion, no pay raise can save you from the judgment of God. You may never stand before Pharaoh, but you will stand in your marriage, facing tension or struggle, asking if your vows still matter. They do. They do, and what God has joined together, let not man separate. Fear God and what He says. Trust in God that He keeps His promises. You may never stand before Pharaoh, but you will stand with your friends. You feel pressured to fit in and just do what everybody else is doing because it's easier. Here's what I tell you. You fear the judgment of God. You don't fear the jeers of your friends. You may never stand before Pharaoh, but you're going to stand somewhere. And the question is, what are you going to do then? Here's what I'm urging you. Don't take the path of least resistance. Take the path of obedience. Because on the other side of obedience is God's blessing. So fear God. Trust Him. Obey Him. And watch what God's going to do.